incentive programs. And of course, we do a lot in the land space, but we've also been doing increasingly more business in the cruise space. And we've been aligned with cruises for over 25 years at some level, but we're seeing an increase. And Karen is our internal kind of cruise expert, and she partners with us on everything relating to cruise because she has such deep experience with the cruise industry, not only knowing the ships, but knowing how to contract the ships, solving problems in the lanes of cruises, and really is seen as one of the foremost experts in the cruise industry around our industry lanes. She serves on the board of directors with the Incentive Research Foundation. And we were just joking about her return trip from Paws Up in Montana with all of her colleagues. But Karen is just greatly respected in the industry around her knowledge of cruises and her passion for the industry of cruising. So today we're going to learn more about cruising and how it can create opportunities for you. Hopefully answer any questions, maybe overcome obstacles some people maybe have about, can we cruise, should we cruise? And so with that, I just want to introduce Karen Devine, our cruise industry expert, and enlighten us today, Karen, and thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of the opportunity. Welcome, everybody. Our goal today is for you to not only learn a little bit about cruise, whether you know cruise a little bit or a lot or somewhere in the middle, the goal is for you to always walk away learning something that you didn't know before. So with that, what I want to start talking about is how we consider cruise. And I'm going to talk about the cruise industry in general. And we always relay that and associate it to hotel brand because that resonates with so many people. But before I do, what I'd like to start with is how the concept of cruise can be considered, particularly now in the space that we sit as the cruise industry is launched over again. So many people know, our pause over the last couple of years, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions about that after we wrap up. But as we go forward, and because of the products that we now have available, because of the flexibility that we now have at our fingertips within the cruise industry, and all of which we work together with our partners at Prestige to make sure that you know at any given time what's available to you out there and literally how much of it there is. But as we sit there and talk about cruise, in the past, it seems that people would look at, you throw spaghetti at the wall for whatever you might want to look at in any given year, and hey, let's throw in a cruise. And what I want to talk about now is maybe changing that narrative to, the ship is just one piece of it, but combined with the global aspect of where cruising can go, it literally does become an overall experience. So if you're looking at Italy, or you're looking at Prague or Vienna or the Caribbean or Alaska or Tahiti or the South Pacific, wherever it may be, is there a cruise that is a solution for that? And that's the beauty of our partnership here, is we're not ever going to put a square peg in a round hole. It's the idea of listening to, what are you looking for? Where are you looking to go? What are you trying to accomplish? And is there a ship out there that would fit that need? Because we'll be the first to tell you if there isn't, but if there is, what about that concept? What about thinking about that for something new or different and waking up in a new place every day? And bear in mind too, and again, please ask questions as we go through or at the end, but recognize that, cruising is a vessel that takes you to all these unique destinations around the world. So is there some place that you're dying to go that you can wake up and look at something different every day and experience that and bring the destination on board the ship? So marry the two. Because in the past too, when you look at a cruise ship, even if it doesn't have to be a charter, it could be a group as well. You can bring the destination on board. Is there decor and design elements that we can do? Are there things that we can do to bring that environment on board and make it that all-encompassing destination? So that's what I wanted to share with you on how to really think about cruising in a new era. And again, marrying the destinations to the products to your fit is exactly what we're trying to do. So what we do here is try to keep you in front of this. As you can imagine, the industry is changing rapidly. That's because of literally new facets of ships through every segment of it. We'll talk about the segments more in just a second. But there are so many new vessels and so many new deployment opportunities. Ships are now investigating other locations than they ever went before. So my job for you all is to answer something in nanoseconds if I can. If you're not sure if a cruise might be a fit, my job is to answer that and to guide you and tell you if it is or it isn't and why. Or maybe there's a different tweak or a different twist to it that we can look at. So again, it's an opportunity to consider what may or may not be a new concept for you in cruising, but what's new in cruising as things develop or have continued to develop over the years. So that's the cruise industry basically in a whole. Which I always smile with this one and say, you know, you all, so many of you know the world so well. At any given time, might be able to talk about, you know, this hotel or that hotel in any given destination. But when it comes to cruise, oftentimes it's confusing. And literally, that's it. So you'll see these 4 buckets basically here, and that's how we associate cruise. And that's where I want to start for just a second in explaining how we associate the different cruise lines to the different hotel chains, because that is exactly what will, I hope, resonate. So if your land program has typically been a Four Seasons or a Ritz-Carlton or a Montage or something like that, then we know where to play in that luxury category. If it's a JW or a Grand Hyatt, or maybe it's a boutique or whatever, that's where we're going to play in that next bucket of premium. Contemporary are your big resort hotels. That's your big resort cruise ships. And then the river cruise lines, we actually put into an entirely separate category now because there are so many different opportunities. Where it crosses over is you might have a high-end luxury group, for example, but they want all the bells and whistles of a big resort. Well, maybe it's the same thing you do on land, where we look at an all-suite block or a higher-end group block or something like that with more customized group and meeting type functions. And then they have all of the capabilities of the large ship. Maybe they want nothing to do with that, and they just want that pure luxury experience, and that's where we're going to stay in that luxury lane. But the point is they can cross over in between the various categories. But bottom line is, anytime that we're looking at an RFP and considering a cruise, your history of your destination, and most important is your preference on hotel brand, will tell us exactly where we need to play. What's exciting right now is not only in the past, you've all heard about new ships, or at least I hope you have. We actually have brand new cruise lines now entering service, which just builds the excitement of the cruise industry so much more. So I won't go into all of the detail here, but I'm sure you've all heard about the Ritz-Carlton yacht that just finally launched, and we're so happy it did. They've got another one coming. Another new cruise line is Four Seasons is now building. Another new one you see there is Orient Express is now building. We have new river cruise lines. Some of them are taking ships that existed in the Crystal brand before and relaunching that luxury line on the rivers. Others are building brand new vessels. So the point is, it's just an exciting time to be in cruise, because not only do we have each one of these brands and pretty much every single one of them building new, we also have new cruise lines attributing to the product out there. And then that leads to new deployment as well. So I go back in time for just a moment to establish some history during a very difficult time, as we all know, in our industry. Even yet, in 2020, during the middle of everything, there were 16 new ships that were delivered. Obviously, those were ordered prior, but the point is, like, we had people asking over the years about the financial well-being of the cruise industry, and it was alive and well even through that pause. So even with that, we had 16 ships delivered in 2020. We had 26 more that came in 2021. And then last year and this year, you can kind of get an idea here, but you see that last year, still more vessels coming. Next year, this year, still more coming, including a new cruise line. And that top point is very important for you to know. So with all of that new build and all of that new deployment coming, there are still over 70 new vessels on the new ship order book yet to be delivered. So as I was talking about a moment ago, we have all these elements of cruise still growing and building. And that's really important for you to know, that the cruise lines and the ships together have so much on the order book. So what we're looking for as we're examining and looking at new RFPs or new opportunities is there one of those new vessels? And you see a common theme here. I've got 2 yachts sitting here. A lot of these new builds that are coming are yacht style. So we now have brand new sleek yachts of 50 cabins up to, when the new Ritz comes out, of 288. So there's some new stuff coming in that small inventory. We are seeing a lot of interest in charter because the ships are smaller and people can take them over, and there's a lot of flexibility in itinerary and customization on board. But I don't want you to think of a cruise and just think of it as a charter, because we can do the same thing with customized spaces on the group side as well. So what we do together with Prestige is very important, and it's not just, hey, we want to throw a cruise at you. The education, which is, I think, the segment that we're doing today, and understanding the cruise industry a little further, the sourcing aspect of it to ensure that we listen. What is your RFP? What is your history? What are you looking for? And our job is to come back to you with everything we can think of both in and outside the box. Leveraging our buying is exactly one of the reasons that we're partnered with Prestige, is to ensure, just like they have on the land side, you have the same partnership and the same buying power, all of which passes through to you on the cruise side. And then the execution, it's the operations side. So we take it from start to finish together, help you out through every step of the way, through all aspects that you need, or just the elements of it that you need. So this is where I want to dive into a little bit of the meat on cruise and the why of cruise. And I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a former hotelier, and before that I was a customer. And I'm never going to have anything negative to say as we compare cruise to land. I just want to open your eyes as to how it compares. Because of course, our hotel partners out there and our DMC partners and everybody on the ground side is equally as important. But what we want you to know is the inclusive nature of cruise and how that relates. So that headline is true. Typically, as we look at bottom line value, a cruise is going to price somewhere between 20 and 30% less than land. Some of that can be the inclusive part of the land program. And the biggest part of that is typically audiovisual, F&B minimums, and room rentals. So on a ship, and think of it maybe as an all-inclusive hotel. That's the closest comparison we have to cruise. But one of the biggest elements of cruise, and it doesn't matter which segment of cruise you're in, is the fact that you never pay for audiovisual, you never pay for a meeting room rental or a function space rental, and there aren't any food and beverage minimums. And I think that's a big deal. So typically what we do with cruise is, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but their bottom line comparison is what we try to look at. Room rate is difficult, right? Because cruise is based on a per person price based on double occupancy. So as you look at the cruise pricing and you look at hotel, the cruise pricing might seem higher. But then as you scale down and look at the bottom line, after you take all those other elements into place, the inclusive nature of the overall cruise package typically is where we see that 20 to 30%. So obviously, there's different charges and things that happen in hotels, just like they are on ships. But what we can do is, even with the lowest level cruise line, we can package it if it's somebody who needs an all-inclusive beverage package, gratuities, taxes, fees, all of that included, and still show that value on that bottom line. Sorry, I'm using my hands for that, but that bottom line figure, to make sure that the value of the overall package is very well described. So this is pretty much the overview of how the cruise pricing works. What is important with that is, as we then start narrowing it down to cruise lines, you're going to see a similarity. And I'll go through these quickly because it's probably very hard to see. So don't worry about the detail here, but it all says the same thing. The inclusive part of cruise is your meeting space, your beverage packages, if we include those. And by the way, the Four Seasons and I'm a former Four Seasons girl, so bear with me in saying that, but any of the luxury cruise lines are all inclusive, meaning top shelf liquor, all your gratuities, all your meals, everything. On the lower level lines, are the ones that aren't inclusive, we can make it so. But even without having to do that, we don't have meeting room rentals, we don't have audiovisual charges. So this is an example just of Royal Caribbean and what they do. Another one is, I'm going to scroll through that quickly, Celebrity, same thing, a little bit. So there's Royal Caribbean in the contemporary space together with Norwegian, Carnival, and Princess. And then we go up one notch to the Holland Americas and the Celebrities and some of the premium level ships, which, as you can see, they also went all inclusive. So beverage package included, gratuities, and Wi-Fi included. So there's a lot of inclusive nature on every level of cruising. And again, as we start comparing that to the hotel side, when we look at our bottom level, typically that budget will look very attractive. Norwegian also did something very interesting. They went all inclusive. So their pricing now includes their beverage package, et cetera. So even on those contemporary brands, some of them have tried to go all inclusive as a way to attract not only the retail guest, but make it more cost effective and inclusive on the group side also. So where are we with all of that? I know I'm going through it relatively quick, but I want to make sure we save some time for questions. People laugh all the time when I show this slide for obvious reasons with an iceberg in the cruise industry, but I love it because it so clearly states it's exactly what your Prestige partners do, and we, in support of them, is watch your back on what you can't see. So there are all kinds of legalities that come with maritime law and maritime in general that are different from a hotel contract, for example. So my job is to help explain, and for those of you that I've worked with already, on cruise business with Prestige, you've probably seen that a little bit, where we have to explain the why. Why is it different? There are very, very valid reasons why some of the language can be different on the cruise side, and it's all structured around maritime. Why is the important part. So when we get involved with that, particularly for charters, and talk to your risk or your legal, our job is to explain the why. So it's a pretty high risk, as is the reward when you charter the ship. And again, explaining all of the elements of that so that it's less overwhelming in understanding this, document that comes with the charter of a cruise ship. Usually, if not always, we get risk and legal happy, at least comfortable, maybe not happy, because sometimes they're not going to be, but happy and comfortable in understanding the why of that contract. So I didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but I wanted you to understand our job is way more the below the surface than it is above. It's easy to see what's out there. What are all these things under the surface to watch your back, to protect you, to make sure your investment in that cruise, be it a group or a charter, are well protected? And that's really the bulk of our job and what we do. The knowledge of it is one thing. The protection is entirely another. So I end it with this. In talking about how I started and considering cruising all over the world, in expedition, in luxury, in contemporary, in premium, how can that compare? Is there an opportunity for you to think about cruise in a new way, in a way that marries the destination with the ship that takes you along on that destination? Is it a cruise itinerary that has overnights in ports? Sometimes we hear a concern about cruises. Oh, shoot, we have to rush back and get back on board. Well, maybe not, because so many cruise itineraries now are staying overnight in ports to give people an opportunity to spend more time in that destination. So my ask of this would be, if I may have one, is to consider or reconsider how you look at cruise. Instead of just saying, hey, let's throw a cruise in the mix, can cruise become one of the destination choices, because there's so much product out there now and so many new itineraries to look at that makes it justified to be one of them like that? So with that, I'll end it with, I appreciate the opportunity. This partnership is incredibly important to both of us, meaning Prestige and myself, in educating the industry and bringing cruise to the forefront in a way that you might not have thought of before. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the opportunity. I know it's kind of a lot and pretty high level, but the hope is that you walk away, as I started, with something you didn't know, and perhaps some questions that I can answer. So with that, Doug, I'll turn it back to you. And thank you very much.
Well, thanks for that great overview, and it's a lot to unpack for sure. And hopefully, project by project, we can unpack these uniquenesses around the different proposals and bids that we'll be looking at. But let's just start with the questions. So Shalee from Kemin had mentioned, can you talk about hybrid and live streaming for a virtual audience from a ship? Are you seeing that? How is it accommodated? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so the good news is the entire global fleet of cruising has available Wi-Fi now, and that's pretty consistent across fleets. However, some of them have better Wi-Fi than others. For example, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines has now put in Starlink on all of their ships. So that providing the opportunity to do live streaming has never been better. The entire Royal Caribbean family, by the way, which includes Royal Caribbean, Celebrity, and Silversea, all have Starlink by March, I believe, of this year, with the last one being in the Galapagos. So even the most remote destinations are starting to get that upgraded Wi-Fi. So if that's something that's really important, we would look at what ships provide the best Wi-Fi and or virtual service. I hope that makes sense. In the past, it was a little tricky. Now, not so much anymore.
Are any doing any kind of a built-in format regarding virtual, where they almost have an onboard studio, or kind of a preparing more for this kind of virtual world we're seeing with some of these hybrid demands?
No, I mean, so far, to be perfectly honest, so far it's been reactive versus proactive. So doable, we've figured out how to do it, but it's not something so far, except, again, I'll talk about Royal Caribbean in that regard, because they seem to be the master of this kind of event space and ability to live stream and so forth. But again, so far it's been reactive, but can be done.
So would you have to add AV equipment to what's maybe on board already, or do they have the capacity to do this on pretty much every ship?
I won't go quite. Go ahead.
Without the addition of additional equipment that you might have to pay for.
Yes, so far, and again, with the implementation of Starlink that is still really new, I'd probably want to double check myself on that. But so far, we have not had to charge for that. The setup of it, so far I've not seen a fee for on the companies like Royal. It's not been a ton of them so far though. In that virtual space, I feel like virtual has gone a little bit away, at least on the cruise side. So I think if we had an opportunity for that, I'd want to double check myself to be sure. I know the capability is there. I have not seen charges for it as of yet.
Okay. Let's keep moving down the questions. So another question by Karen is, what's the average number of people you see for river cruising? And I know you can kind of do the flotilla thing, but what are you seeing for numbers on average?
Yeah, so that's our biggest pain point on river is the size of the vessels. So the biggest vessel you have is just under 100 cabins, roughly. Very important question that we always ask on river is it a tiered incentive? If it's an incentive, is it tiered? Because most of the ships have a couple of different varieties of cruise, of cabins, excuse me, just like an ocean ship would. The difference is on a river cruise, most of them sit in the 70 to 75 cabin range, of which 12 or 15 of them are deck one or window cabin. So the size of group, almost everything we do on river is charter, not everything, but a lot of it, because the size lends itself to that. I'll give this as an example though. Don't let the size keep you from considering river, because Doug just mentioned that we can do tandems in double and triple. So we can double or triple the inventory and the ships literally dock together, stacked together on the river. We have one customer who wanted to travel 1,200 people. And what we did is we took 2 ships in Budapest and we took 2 ships in Germany. All 4 met in Vienna, and then they went back and forth and did that for multiple waves till we got to 1,200. So there's all kinds of ways we can slice and dice river. It really is up to, and by the way, it can be 3-night, 4-night, 5-night, 7-night, whatever you want. It's so easy to customize a river charter, and most of the business is charter because of the size of the ship, and it lends itself to that and the flexibility of that particular contract.
I want to throw out an interesting question. You know, I've in the past chartered things that have gone to St. Lawrence, but then end up in the North Atlantic. Do you consider that a river cruise? It's probably not really a river cruise, but it's an amazing itinerary people forget about.
The Canada, New England, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the St. Lawrence is ocean cruises that do that because it's big enough to take the ships. So no, we don't consider that a river. Domestically on the river, though, we have the upper and lower Mississippi, for example, from New Orleans we can do. Another one that people don't think of as often is the Lewis and Clark Trail in Portland or in Washington State. That's really cool. And by the way, on the domestic rivers, there is brand new river cruise build that I'll tell you, it will rival the gorgeous, luxury, beautiful ships that we have in Europe. So brand new builds domestically, something else to consider, because those river cruises from New Orleans or from the West are absolutely interesting, very cool, and places a lot of people haven't been.
Yeah, I just saw the new cruise terminal in Memphis on the Mississippi, and I was like, wow, this is exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot of money and a lot of effort. Some of it I think is it was not born through COVID, but expanded because so many people looking to stay closer to home. And you know, like anything in the travel industry, the retail markets drive that inventory, but so many people didn't want to do the old paddle wheelers anymore. They wanted a new product, and the industry responded in kind, which is pretty cool.
That's exciting. Another question that came up was, can you guarantee certain meeting rooms for your group on a ship?
Yes, you can. And we put them in the contract at the time we issue it and sign it.
Okay, excellent. One other question that came up is, if you have CEOs or speakers that want to disembark before the cruise ends, like what's the flexibility for the on and off component for speakers?
Yeah, so it depends on if we're in the US or international, but the easy answer is no problem. We can, for example, board in Miami and disembark a speaker or somebody in Nassau. We can board in Barcelona and disembark somebody in Monte Carlo or Italy or whatever. So there are maritime legalities surrounding that, and that the easiest way to explain it is you must hit a foreign port before you can disembark. That's the legal side of it. The only challenging place is Alaska, because you're boarding, unless you're boarding in Vancouver, but like the ones that board in Seattle, for example, typically don't hit Canada till the very last day. That's the only challenging one. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to embark on arrival day and disembark early, or embark later and disembark on departure day. There are ways to do that.
Okay. Regarding the charter world, I mean, I always think of cruises around, like if you're chartering, you're trying to find size vessels that kind of match the size of the group. So When you think about a number of a size of a group and the number of a size of a ship, like how close do you have to be? Because you don't want to pay for too much, say, dead inventory, if you will.
Yeah, so that's again our job is to, once we know what the numbers are and the specs are, we will find the ship as close to that as we can. And frankly, that's what I said earlier in this presentation too, is we will never square peg round hole it. If it isn't a fit, we'll tell you it's not a fit. Because if it's not cost effective, you need to be aware of that. Because the other thing to be aware of, if you're not already, is cruise pricing, and I'll take charter out of the mix for just a quick second, is per person based on double occupancy. Having said that, more and more cruise lines are now responding with single fares, which is awesome because we do have singles on ships that don't want to pay double. On the charter side, the opposite can also be true where, we have a client right now that we're looking at. They are 1,600 cabins outside and up. They're literally going to pay for 300 or 400 empty inside cabins, but they have the budget to do so and they want the ship. So again, our job is to listen. What are you trying to accomplish? How best do we accomplish that? Can we do it within budget? And I said earlier on, our job is to give you everything inside and outside of the box. So maybe there's a ship out there that's close and we're going to have to pay for a few more cabins, but it's less expensive because of where it sits, and we can make it all inclusive, and therefore it fits the bottom line. I know it's kind of a lot to spit out, but the point is, we will listen to what the specs are and respond in kind with what might seem obvious and maybe what might not.
Excellent. With regards to incentive travel programs, personally, we're seeing a lot of demand for river right now. And it seems like the Danube seems to be kind of front and center for a lot of first rung people that are cruising. That seems to be kind of that blue ribbon cruise that everybody has to try first. But in the incentive space, like what are you seeing as the most prominent ideas that people are pursuing right now?
On the rivers?
Rivers or the luxury ocean lines, is one favoring the other? Are you seeing trends? I mean,
River was wildly popular before COVID, and it is back with a vengeance. And the why of that is because there's remarkable product. We have luxury, we have high-end premium. It really doesn't go below that, but the price points are so aggressive and attractive for clients to provide a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or a 7-night river cruise, and you're in 4 different countries. So, and it's a boutique hotel floating down the river. There's no such thing as seasickness, for example, because you're on a river. You're walking off into these amazing European capitals. It's such a win-win. As I said, our biggest challenge on river is the size. So river continues to be incredibly strong. Something else to note is there's different river itineraries now. So no doubt the Danube is #1 for every first river cruise, unless people have done a Budapest or Vienna, maybe land program. Otherwise, Danube is a slam dunk because it's 4 countries and you're good. Second to that is probably the Rhine, Amsterdam to Switzerland. The south of France has gotten a lot of traction. Belgium and Holland has gotten a lot of traction. Portugal is relatively new. Because of new builds and new ships. So there's all kinds of different itineraries. So again, I go back to the same thing. Where have you been? Where would you like to go? And how do we address that if it's a river experience, to make sure that we're providing a new destination or new itinerary or new experience than maybe they had done in the past on a land program. Even if it's the Danube and you've done Vienna or you've done Budapest, what can we do to tweak and twist that on a river that's different?
Makes sense. Question came up from Amanda regarding just the water levels in the European rivers. I know there was questions about that.
Sure.
What's the reality there? How did they respond to some of these things? Just curious.
I'm smiling because it's a question that comes up often, and I'm going to liken it a little bit to, and I know most of you probably don't know this, but during COVID, when the cruise industry was shut down, we became a one-man spokesperson for the cruise industry in a way, because there was so much fiction versus fact. And it's unfortunate because of what was reported versus the factual statistics of what actually was happening. I parallel that to what happened last summer and has happened a few times. There's no doubt that low water can happen, but it's the exception, not the rule. And the focus wasn't on the literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of river cruises that went off without a hitch, or how the ones that didn't operate, most of them, not all, took care of the guest from the perspective of they still got their entire river cruise experience. They might have gotten off one ship and gone to a sister ship in the same cabin a little bit further upriver and continued on their journey. So there are ways that the river industry knows how to address that, and they do. To completely avoid it, it's spring and early summer's good. It's that heat of maybe July, August where it can happen, but it is certainly not the norm. But when it happens, it's all over the news, like the cruise industry tends to be. And I don't mean to roll my eyes because I do take it very seriously, but the facts support the consistency of nothing ever happening. So, do things happen, around the world, be it land or cruise or whatever, that are exceptions? Yes. Is it the norm on a river to have that happen? No. And let me back up, Doug. I didn't answer the other part of your what's new, what's hot. Expedition cruising is also trending, very popular right now, be it Antarctica or the Galapagos or the Arctic, or the fjords. It seems like there's an awful lot of interest in expedition. And it's also because the cruise product has been enhanced now to the point that you're not on a down and dirty expedition cruise. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you can be off in that beautiful Silver Sea ship in the Galapagos, exploring lava fields and exploring wildlife, and you're coming back to that creature comfort. Same thing in Asia, by the way, on the Mekong, which is another incredible river experience, but you're coming back to that creature comfort every night and that level of incentive experience that you require.
Yeah. One thing I've seen a barrier sometimes for groups is like length of stay. A lot of the best cruises are like 7 nights, and many incentive programs are 4 and 5 nights. So how do you scale that? I mean, obviously chartering, you have the option, but maybe just speak to that a little bit, because I think that's a barrier for some people.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways we can address that. Typically what we'll do is look at a pattern, for example. Could we look at a 7-night if it fits budget and it only takes the guests out of the office for 5, like a weekend to weekend pattern? Does that work? Is there an ocean cruise out there that is 4 or 5 nights in Europe or somewhere other than the United? It's easy in the US, right? Because there's a ton of 3, 4s, and 5s out of here. More and more of the cruise lines are starting to offer some short med, for example, but to your point, they're few and far between. So if it can only be a 3 or a 4 or a 5, I'll say a 3 or a 4. If it can only be a 3 or a 4, it's going to be challenging to find something unless we charter on ocean cruising outside of, in Europe or elsewhere. If it's a river, no problem. If it's a charter, no problem. And if it's a 5-night, I would look at a weekend to weekend if the client can consider that, because it's only 5 days out of the office.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Another question Carolyn threw out was just regarding these river levels. I mean, sometimes the water could be high and you can't get under the bridges. Is that true? Is it kind of a high
again, occasionally. Yep, occasionally. Most of the time we have issue, if it's an issue, which is the exception, and I can't stress that enough, is low water. In the spring, if you think about, the rivers are fed by melting ice and so forth. In the spring, yes, it can be, or there's torrential rains, which is also uncommon, but can happen. Then yes, every now and then we'll see that where the water is high. That is a rare exception. The low water is a little bit more frequent, but still definitely an exception. I hope that answers Carolyn's question, but it's very uncommon. So that sweet spot of when to go, probably late spring, early summer, fall. Great sweet spot of when to do river.
And then there was another question Jessica mentioned just about, a lot of people maybe haven't seen certain ships. I know some of the bigger ships, when they're transitioning to new itineraries, sometimes you'll have, like in the Pacific Northwest, a short cruise, maybe between the Vancouver and Victoria or something. I mean, how often is that happening, and is that available in various markets? Just, it's nice to get people out to see the ships, and it's probably a great way to do it sometimes.
Yeah, so every May and every September, we have those West Coast transitionals to and from Alaska. We'll see those 2 and 3 one-off cruises. Elsewhere in the US, they don't happen too frequently. What we try to do, though, is something called a day visit. If somebody's interested in seeing a ship and maybe doesn't have the time to sail or get on board and disembark early or something like that, and there's different ways we can try to slice and dice it, but it's to do a day visit. So anytime the ship comes into port, they turn the same day. They come in the morning, disembark guests, reload, reprocure, and go out that night. That's a brilliant opportunity to do a day visit, which we do all the time, where we have to clear. Everybody has to clear. That's the other cool thing about a cruise ship, which I didn't even mention, sorry, is the security of that. You just can't walk on a ship. You have to be cleared. So when you get on board, you're cleared to do so, and you do a full site. You look at cabins in the morning before guests are in them, have a lovely lunch on board to experience the food and beverage, look at all the meeting and function space, and disembark in the afternoon. It's a wonderful way for a customer who's considering a cruise to see the ship, get a little bit of a taste and feel literally for the ship, and then decide if they're comfortable going forward with it, then they can set up a sailing site. So it's a brilliant, when those day visits are literally global, anywhere in the world, we can set up a day visit.
Okay. Another issue we haven't really talked about, Sheila kind of brings this up, is meetings on cruise ships. A lot of what we're seeing has been more around reward travel, incentive travel, kind of experiences where meetings aren't as big of a deal, but where you have a legit meeting that has more of a focused agenda with a little bit of time off. Talk about meetings and cruise ships and how that works.
Happy to. There are certainly cruise lines that are better fit for meeting groups. All of the cruise lines will give us areas of space. They all have a lounge or a theater, typically that seat capacity or half capacity, depends on the size of the vessel, depends on the size of the meeting. So can we get the theater think about that for a second, theater seats on a Royal Caribbean ship, for example, or Norwegian, or even Celebrity, over 1,000 people, for example. Well, we've got that theater to use with all of that audio visual. If you think about the incredible Broadway productions they do, there's screens, there's lights, there's everything, and we get that complimentary. So that's one area of space. So the cruise industry in general will give you space to use. We have to work around, they're doing rehearsals in the theater for the Broadway show, or they've got an ice show on the ice rink or whatever, but they're willing to work around it. Some cruise lines, like Royal Caribbean, have dedicated conference space. So depending on the size of the group, we can take over the conference space. Some of them are so big, we've done a level of the dining room as a trade show. Because if you think about a big ship dining room can be 2 to 3 levels. Well, they don't use all that during the day, or will they close it completely during the day for a trade show type of meeting? So the answer is there's all kinds of answers to the space. Whether this space is appropriate for the client is ultimately up to you. There's probably going to be required a little bit of different flexibility, but conference rooms, meeting space dedicated in the contract absolutely can be done. At the end of the day, it's up to the customer it's up to us to educate what's available, and up to them to be comfortable with that and decide if they can make that work or not. So it's a little bit different than a hotel because you don't have that ballroom 24/7. The conference space we do, but if it's a big group and we need the theater, which Sheila well knows, for something like that, we have to work around the ship's scheduling, or they will work around our scheduling if we're reasonable with what we need and want, and they still have time to do their rehearsals and so forth. So I'm sorry, that might be a little bit of a gray answer, but what I want you to have the takeaway is there is flexible meeting space on cruise ships that can be dedicated for a group. And we can assign that space in advance. We just have to, communicate and educate what the space is, what times we can have it to make sure it works for the customer.
Is it more in the contemporary ships then, like the Royal Caribbean types, more so?
Yeah, I would say contemporary and premium. So Celebrity and Holland America do a wonderful job of that. The big ships do too. The flip side is when you're chartering, doesn't matter what size ship it is, it's yours. So what do you want to do with the space? If there's normally a show and you don't want a show, we don't have a show. So when you charter, it's your ship, it's your programming, it's your everything. On the group side, yes, it's typically the bigger ships that have the good space.
Are there any remnant like COVID restrictions left on the industry? I know there was a pretty strict scenario for a while there, but it seems like it's opened up again. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so vaccination requirements are no longer with any of the cruise lines. I am not aware at the moment of any vaccination requirements on destinations either. Initially, when the cruises came back in, we still had a couple of destinations, like Greece was one of them. Bermuda was one of them, that were still requiring vaccination for cruise guests, but not for other guests. That was a crazy thing we went through. At today, no testing, no vaccination. It's gone. They still will ask, I think, on the registration, they still ask about vaccination status, which can be no. So you're not declined anymore to sail if you're not vaccinated.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think that highlights the questions I see. opportunity here for anybody else to throw a question out to Karen that you're burning to ask.
Karen, just to kind of follow up on that question, are there any restrictions? Like if somebody says, I don't want to disclose my vaccine status, can they do that?
Mhm.
And then to follow up on that, are there certain areas of the ship that maybe, I mean, we don't want that, but I'm saying like, or I'm thinking if all of the unvaccinated people have to be in this room category or this side, we wouldn't want to
Not
see
anymore.
that either. Okay, good.
Not anymore.
Good.
Nope, it's all gone. It's all been
Good.
eliminated. And actually, one step further, my pain point, if you will, when we first got back to cruising, when they eliminated the mask mandate on ships, was the crew was still required to be masked. And that broke my heart because you miss looking at those smiling faces, and that's now been eliminated as well. So no, there are no restrictions of any kind. I'll stop just short of saying anywhere. I mean, if it's some remote destination, we might find something, but there's no vaccinated versus non-separation anywhere that I'm aware of on any ship at the moment.
Okay, so there's a question about dining restrictions around that. So it sounds like nothing there would be restricted at all.
No, and nobody knows on board who's vaccinated and who's not because it's no longer a requirement. So initially, when the ships came back, you could go to this dining room if you were unvaccinated, and you go there if you were vaccinated. None of that anymore. It's all gone.
Okay, got it. Well, I just a curious story. We got into this industry doing the cruise stuff a long time ago. Back in the late 90s. One of my first cruise clients, we chartered a cruise ship. We took the same ship and we chartered it for 6 years in different destinations around Europe. And 1 year we did a tandem river thing, but it was a phenomenal experience. And it was a great foray into the cruise industry. And I still think there's so much opportunity to use cruise ships in that way. Like the staff got to know the crew of the staff got to know my clients really well, and the people that attended. It became this really cool relationship. It was a German-speaking staff, and they formed this relationship. It was a pretty amazing situation. So I think cruising is out of the box for some folks, but boy, so many examples we can share over the years that have been really successful, where clients have had huge wins with cruise itineraries. And personally, one of my people I was asking, I've traveled for 37 years. Where have you been? What are your favorite places? The sailing from Rome to Venice on the Adriatic with Montenegro and Croatia and Capri, and that is still one of my highlight trips, and along with the Danube. But there's just so many big wins in the cruise industry.
Well, and a good takeaway for that is, I mean, where else can you pack and unpack one time and see multiple destinations? And it's really, maybe a little bit of a cliche of the cruise industry, but it's true. I mean, it's literally true. And finding, to Doug's point, that port intensive itinerary or where in the world you want to be, there's likely a ship that can take you there, obviously along the oceans. And so many of the incentive programs go to coastal locations or whatever, or within, there's just as a sidebar, I had a customer this morning I was speaking with about, they were looking at a Vienna-Prague program, land, and we were looking at something else on ships. And I said, well, hold on, what about doing a Prague pre-extension? And how about we do a 4 or 5 night Danube? And we do Vienna and Budapest. She's like, oh my God, I didn't even know we could do that. So, I mean, there's so many fun conversations around the creative aspect of cruising because of all these cool places they go.
Well, there's an old saying, Karen, when there's a will, there's a way. And
I
all
have
that
the
we
will.
have to do is call Karen. We'll figure out the way.
If it exists, I will find it.
Right, exactly. So with that, any other last questions anybody wants to throw out? All right, well, all of you clients, thanks again for joining us. We're so thankful you took time to listen and learn a bit today. Feel free to reach out to your sales partner that invited you to join this call with any questions, and we'd be happy to set up one-on-ones with Karen to talk about specific things that you may have coming up and put proposals together, whatever it takes. But for closer of today, we're just thankful for you all joining us, and we look forward to working more together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.